Hello and welcome. I'm Christian and I'm currently developing a game called Beans or Bones, a two-player online co-op game. And recently I was wondering what kind of skills I'm missing to become a more complete and full-fledged indie dev. So I started to lay out a kind of map with all the skills required to address all the things in indie dev. And I thought it might be helpful for you if I share it, that you can figure out where you are in your game dev journey. Typical game dev journey starts as a player or a gamer. You like to play games, and at some point in time you figure out, oh, you can build your own games. You figure out there are something like game engines, and there are a lot of online tutorials or online courses, and you start playing around with it. You're learning all that stuff that's required, like modeling, animation, coding, and maybe you develop your first game and release it on Steam or as a mobile game or any other of these platforms. And the typical experience is that not a lot of people are actually playing your games or even buy your games and pay for it. And this can be pretty frustrating, and at that point of time you wonder what can you do to improve on that side. So up to that point, developing and releasing a game from a technical side is pretty standard procedure. And there are a lot of courses and online tutorials that cover this process. But when it comes to building a community around your game or the things you do as an indie dev, there's not a lot of structured approaches available. So this is where I'm mainly focusing on, even if I'm not really know how to solve this problem in a standard way. So let's dive right into it and see what kind of skills, or at least on a high level, you require to become a more complete indie dev. So as an indie dev, you basically have to care about three things. You have to care about yourself, about your game, and about the player. And you have to understand the relation between these three elements. So let's start understand the relationship. And let's assume you already have a game. And then you have the player. So if you want to find players for your game, the first thing you need is that the player is able to discover your game. The player must be able to figure out that your game exists at all. So, and on the next level, the player needs to like the preview. So what you are offering the player to see what the game is about. Because only if the player is convinced that it's probably fun to play your game, the player will be willing to pay for the game, and after that play your game. And finally, what you like to have, if the player has played the game, that he maybe leaves a positive review. That's the best case that you can have, that the player likes to play the game and leaves a positive review and say, hey folks, play this game, you will have fun. Now let's look into the relation between the game and yourself, the indie dev. So the first thing you have to focus on is to create some resonating ideas. That means finding ideas that resonate with your potential players. So after you developed your idea and maybe tested the idea with some of players or friends or fellow indie devs, you have to develop the game. This is everything from coding to modeling to making art and animations, everything around that. So after you developed something, you need to test it. That's pretty straightforward. And you need to produce your game. And with production, I mean all the things from building it, translating it, and getting the game out on any of the distribution platforms. And finally, you have to maintain the game You have to debug the game, you have to update the game if players complain, you have to maybe modify some of the game mechanics upon feedback, things like that. And I think for this relationship between you and your game and developing the game, this is probably the clearest part of the whole indie dev journey. Now let's look on the relationship between the player and yourself as an indie dev. And the first part is already the most difficult, probably in the whole game dev journey. And somehow you need to reach out to your players or connect with them. And how can you reach out or connect with them if you don't know them? So you're at the beginning of your journey with a new game. How do you find people that are willing to play that game and maybe give feedback? But without connecting to these people, you are not able to understand what they like and not like about your game dev ideas. But if you manage to find some potential players, you need to observe what they like, how they behave, what kind of games they play, what kind of game mechanics resonates with them. This observation will lead to a better understanding of your players, especially things they might not talk about, but you will understand why they behave in a certain way and why they like things and other things not. And then, on that basis, you can create a valuable message or offering. So what does it mean? Based on your understanding of the player, you can create kind of marketing messages or collaterals like GIFs or screenshots and description of the games that resonate with the player, that give them a better understanding what you are talking about and what you try to achieve with your game. And offerings means also maybe you have a Discord server and you want that potential players register on this Discord server and start communicating with you, but they will only do this if they see some value. So maybe it's a value for them that they can connect with you and directly maybe influence your journey and how the game is developed. So you have to think about this kind of offerings to your potential players. And at the end, you have to communicate with them. So looking at the indie dev business as a whole, we find 3 pillars that you have to care about. And the first thing is you have to build a game. The second pillar is you have to build a community around this. Community of potential players. And the last pillar is that I haven't talked about so far is you need to stay healthy. And this is of growing importance because you will spend a lot of time on your computer. You will face a lot of frustration on your journey because not everything that you do and think is totally cool, other people will find super cool and will resonate with others. So you have to make a lot of turns on your journey and change direction and learn and be open. So I will talk about this a little. So let's look at the first pillar and what kind of skills are required to master it. So let's look at the game dev itself. The first thing that you need is what I call craftsmanship. So this is everything from coding, modeling, animation, all that stuff that you have to learn when making a game from a technical perspective. The next skill you need to care about is you need some business skills. And Very often in your development as an indie dev, you have to decide whether you build a certain component or you buy them. So you need to figure out what you are good at and where you need to spend some money to get a certain asset. So it's a business decision, because at the end you need to decide. You spend $50 or euros on a certain asset, and the question is, how much time would it take you to build the same asset in the same quality? And does it increase your fun factor for developing a game? Now we have this point that your game needs to resonate with the players. So what you need to have as on a skill side, you need to be able to develop and build empathy for your players. That means that you understand what they like, what they don't like, what resonates with them, how they feel about playing, how often they play, where you can reach them. Are they willing to pay for your game, or are they reluctant and play rather free games and watch ads instead? All these questions are covered by this empathy element. And one thing that basically combines empathy and craftsmanship is what you definitely need to. It's called creativity. And creativity is sometimes very limited to focus on artwork, modeling, 2D artworks, things like that. But it's about finding ideas that address the empathy side, so that resonate with the player, but are also doable by yourself based on the craftsmanship, the skills you have in that area. I mean, it's pretty easy to develop ideas that you can't build, that might resonate, but still you are limited from the craftsmanship side. Or in other words, you can't be really creative if you don't have empathy for the player and have the required skills to implement your ideas. And the last skill set you need is kind of research skills. Research means you need to figure out what kind of trends are there, what kind of new technologies are there, what kind of communication channels you have to your potential players. All these things. Also, what kind of games are currently resonating on the market, what kind of price range they have. All these questions you need to cover and you need to address with certain research skills. Now let's look on the community building side. And the main skill you need here is clearly empathy. To figure out who's your potential player base and all the things I already said about empathy. The next thing is you also need kind of craftsmanship here. So you need to understand the communication channel. You need to be able to build up communication channel, set up a Discord server, or building collaterals like GIFs or screenshots or any kind of marketing material. You need to write texts about your game, describe it, all that kind of stuff. Is a different set of craftsmanship skills, but still it's craftsmanship at the end. In between craftsmanship and empathy, you have creativity. To create collaterals and marketing materials that resonate with the potential players. And you need to find these offerings, these valuable offerings and messages that you can communicate to your potential players. The next skill set is what you need, communication skills here. So this is all about understanding the different communication channels and playing with them and communicating through them, but also reacting to comments maybe. So that you need to expect that people give disfavorable comments on social media, so you need to understand how to react to them and maybe to get into a better communication and exchange with your players. And again, you need some kind of business skills. This is all around having some business skills and marketing skills to understand how valuable is what you provide to your players. And as before, you also need some research skills. So it's very similar to building the game, but focusing on the player and not the technology of building a game here. And the final pillar we have to talk about is staying healthy. And what does it mean? It means on the one hand side to have a certain mindset. And what I'm thinking about here is to have a kind of experimentation mindset. So experimentation means that you constantly try things out and expect that they can fail. And there's something closely related to this mindset, and this is called resilience. And resilience is probably one of the most important skills you have to build up as an indie dev. So you are not frustrated if things go wrong, and you prepare for failure. And very much connected to this experimentation mindset and the resilience is that you understand from the business side that it's not a good idea to depend as an indie dev on the success of a game. So that means you quit your job, you don't have any money, and then you put out your game on Steam or wherever. And then the only chance to survive is that this will become a success. As it's very unlikely, you shouldn't go that route. So don't depend on expected revenue. It's fine if it's there, but you need to be able to survive without it. Otherwise, this will really impact your health. You need to focus on like workout and food. As an indie dev, you sit a lot at your desk on the computer. So think about going out, doing some workout, eating healthy food and all the things. There are other things like time management. But there's one more thing I would like briefly to talk about, and this is inspiration. Inspiration means to see that things are possible, and that gives you courage and power and energy to continue your journey. And sometimes you have to force yourself to look at other things and go away from your desk and maybe for a day or a week or maybe a couple of weeks. Don't look on your project, but care about other things in life. So this is my take on the topic, and maybe you can leave a comment to see whether it's helpful and where you are on your game dev journey.